Hey guys, tonight we wake up in a room that smells of rosewater, ink, and the faintest trace of dried fig dust. The sun hasn't quite crested the rooftop, but the doves in the courtyard are already bickering, like patients with conflicting humoral temperaments. You stretch under a blanket woven from wool and half-formed thoughts, yawn into your sleeve, and reach for the copper basin at your bedside. This is 17th century Persia. You are a physician, and you probably won't survive this, not because of plague or poison, but because you've agreed to see 3 merchants, a poet, and an astrologer before lunch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know, where are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You splash your face with rosewater, pat it dry with a towel embroidered by your aunt, who insists it helps with sinus clarity, and sit by the window where the breeze smells faintly of market bread and someone's overused jasmine incense. Your assistant, a boy of 12 with the memory of a donkey and the energy of 10, brings your morning barley water and an unrolled list of patients. He holds it like it's a weapon. It's already smudged with pomegranate, a mainstream historical fact. Persian physicians in the Safavid period were deeply educated, often trained in both Galenic medicine and Islamic herbal traditions. Their days balanced diagnosis, pharmacy, religious contemplation, and the unpredictable moods of clients with too much silver and not enough moderation. You drink the barley water. It's lukewarm, slightly gritty. You nod. Today begins. You check your jars: saffron, turmeric, mastic gum, fenugreek, and a small, hopeful tin of dried basil that seems to multiply when no one's watching. Your first patient is waiting in the courtyard. He smells like walnuts because he sells them. And today, apparently, he is very, very sad. You finish your water, pull your ledger close, and step into the sunlight, where melancholy and medicine meet over warm stone tiles. You find him sitting by the fountain, cloaked in a melancholy so thick it might qualify as a fifth humor. He has a basket of walnuts at his feet, untouched, uncracked, and a look in his eyes that says either life has lost its flavor or I overate dried apricots last night. You sit beside him, not close, just enough for the breeze to carry the scent of his despair without overwhelming your rose oil. He sighs, you wait. Eventually he says, "Everything tastes like morning dust." You nod. A mainstream historical fact. Persian physicians considered emotions and digestion deeply intertwined. Melancholy could rise from an imbalance of black bile, often treated with diet, gentle movement, perfumed baths, and poetry. Not necessarily in that order. You reach for your kit. Not the sharp one, the soft one. A pouch of dried herbs, a small tin of quince paste, a scrap of silk infused with rosewater, and a pulse chart etched into a slice of bone. You take his wrist, count. It pulses steady but sluggish. Too much sitting, you murmur. Too much sugar, not enough laughter. He nods, which is either agreement or further diagnosis. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Persian doctors believed that laughter moved internal winds in a healthful direction. One even prescribed viewing cheerful paintings of peacocks as a remedy for spiritual dryness. Another encouraged listening to silly rhymes about pomegranates. You offer him a small square of quince, spiced with cinnamon, just tart enough to trick the tongue into memory. He takes it, chews slowly, looks surprised, then says, "That tastes like spring." You smile. You write down a prescription: warm tea with mint, a walk at dusk, 1 page of poetry aloud, daily. avoiding walnuts for 3 days, not for health, but so his fingers remember longing. He bows, leaves his basket. You take one walnut. Place it on your shelf beside the dried basil. Label it. Cured, mostly. You've barely returned to your writing mat when a servant girl arrives, breathless and clutching a cloth-wrapped bundle like it might explode. She sets it down carefully, unties the corners, and reveals a ceramic jar, sealed with wax and tied with string made from last year's broom bristles. "This is from the goat cellar," she says. "He coughs like thunder and smells like vinegar." You nod solemnly. A jar from the goat cellar means 2 things. The complaint is dramatic, and the cause is probably mutton stew. Again. You pop the wax seal and peer inside. A spoonful of cloudy broth sloshes against the side. You sniff. Strong, meaty, definitely pepper. You ask, "Has he tried not eating 6 bowls at once?" She shakes her head. He says it builds stamina. You sigh and retrieve your tasting spoon. A mainstream historical fact. 17th century Persian medicine linked food intake closely with humoral balance. Rich meats like lamb and goat were considered hot and moist, and overconsumption was believed to disrupt internal harmony, especially if eaten without tempering foods like yogurt, cucumbers, or restraint. You taste the broth. It kicks the back of your throat like a surprised camel. You cough once. Write a note on your prescription tablet. Too much heat. Too little sense. You send her back with instructions. Quince syrup in the morning, boiled lentils with cumin, and under no circumstance should he season with more than 1 spice at a time. Also, walk while chewing, slowly. She bows, whispers. He'll argue. You hand her a wrapped vial of syrup. "This is sweet. Tell him it's a reward." She smiles, tucks it away, and disappears like a breeze full of helpful lies. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some physicians believe that goat-related ailments required goat-related cures, but in metaphor only. One wrote, "For those who live among goats, take time with humility, or the spirit will begin to bleat." You write down the recipe for a cough syrup: cooked quince, strained, a touch of saffron, honey, but not the boastful kind, and a dash of vinegar to remind the tongue it is mortal. You sip your own cup of mint and barley tea, eyes wandering to the window, where a goat bleats in the distance. It's probably not him, but it might be. You look at the walnut on your shelf. It feels smug today. You're halfway through copying a list of dreams and their probable digestive origins: sinking ship, too much lentil, flying over rooftops, mild plum imbalance, when your apprentice announces that the Bathhouse physician is waiting in the courtyard. You close your notebook, tuck it under your cushion, and grab the jar of cucumber peel strips you prepared yesterday. It's time for steam. Not the leisurely kind, the diagnostic kind, which is somehow more humid. You step into the bathhouse just as the steam hits your face, warm and thick with lavender and barely masked complaint. The other physician, older, robed, and already sweating like someone who just ate a cinnamon pear, waves you over. "Too much phlegm in the city this week," he says. You nod. "And rising winds." He gestures toward the patient corner, where 2 merchants argue about whether onion broth causes melancholy or prevents it. A mainstream historical fact. Persian bathhouses, hammams, often doubled as informal medical centers, especially for diagnosing conditions related to humoral imbalance. Physicians used pulse reading, questioning, and careful observation of sweat patterns, skin tone, and breath during steaming sessions to reach a diagnosis. You settle on a bench. The marble is warm. Your forehead begins to glisten. You feel your own bile clarifying. Cucumber? You ask. The older man waves his hand. Always. You unwrap the peels and place them at the stone slab to cool. One of the merchants has stopped arguing and is now trying to breathe like a mystic. You make a note. Likely excess wind. Possibly theatrical. You lean back. The steam curls around your ears. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some medical manuals included instructions for scented steam therapy, recommending combinations of violet petals, poppy leaves, and mint for melancholy, rose, cardamom, and dried apple for general disobedience of the stomach. One particularly confident doctor added cinnamon for clarity of speech in marriage discussions. You chat quietly with your colleague, no louder than the hiss of water on tile. You share a diagnosis. He disagrees. You raise an eyebrow. He raises a cucumber peel. Diplomacy prevails. The merchant exhales deeply. A dramatic pause. Then announces, "I believe my lungs have forgiven me." You write that down, purely for future reference. You rinse your face in the cool basin by the door, thank your fellow physician with a slight bow, and step back into the sun. The city smells different after a steam, clearer, less cluttered. You walk home slowly, stopping once to inspect a patch of mint growing by a cracked step. You pluck one leaf, taste it, smile, write down, strong finish, slightly judgmental. Back at your door, your apprentice holds up another list. This one has a palace seal. You sigh. Nothing says migraine like royalty. The palace gate yawns open with the kind of slowness that implies grandeur, irritation, and a guard who skipped breakfast. You nod politely, adjust your satchel, and step through. The courtyard beyond is a mix of marble, sunlight, and the gentle groaning of the royal gardener bending over a stubborn fig tree. You're not here for figs. You're here for the prince's headache. Again. The same prince, the same headache, the same inevitable diagnosis. Too many late nights, too many long poems, and too much pomegranate wine that insists it's medicinal. You're escorted to the private chamber. Silken drapes billow slightly. A single incense stick burns in a corner like it's working overtime to cover the smell of rose oil and mild suffering. The prince is reclining, eyes closed, a cold cloth pressed dramatically to his brow. He groans theatrically. You bow. He groans again, as if your arrival personally offended his temples. A mainstream historical fact. Persian royal courts often retained multiple physicians, many of whom specialized in particular ailments, eyes, digestion, melancholia, or, in this case, fashionable headaches. Treatments included massage, herbal infusions, dietary restrictions, and long, overly poetic consultations. You check his pulse. Fast, but not dangerous. You ask what he ate last night. He says, a little stew, some melon, and 15 apricots. You blink. In what order? He sighs. All together. I was composing. You nod. Of course. You pull out your small jar of jasmine oil, uncork it, and wave it gently near his temples. The scent floats like a silk scarf in the heat. You dampen your fingers, press lightly at the base of his skull. He moans again, but this one sounds slightly pleased. Here's your quirky tidbit. Certain physicians of the era believed that jasmine could charm away cerebral winds. One added in his notes, if jasmine fails, try quiet, and if that fails, remind the patient that migraines are often improved by less poetry. You apply the oil in circles, ask him how his verses are going. He perks up, recites a couplet about almond trees and heartbreak. You nod. Apply more oil, prescribe a tea of crushed mint, 1 spoon of cooled saffron syrup, and no fruit after sunset. He whines. You remind him he has a choice, headache or restraint. He pouts. You hand him a scented handkerchief, mostly for dramatic exit purposes. He waves you away with a grateful groan. You bow once more. Back in the outer courtyard, the guard nods at you. Was it the almonds this time? You shake your head. The apricots staged a rebellion. He laughs. You walk down the marble steps, through the gate, and back onto the sun-baked street. The smell of the jasmine lingers on your fingers. You sniff once. Then tuck your jar away and head toward the shade. Another patient waits. Another cure stirs. And you've earned exactly half a sip of pomegranate syrup before the next groan. You barely make it back to your courtyard when the pastry maker arrives in a state of what can only be described as politely concealed fury. He bows deeply, too deeply, and presents a platter of hot pomegranate seed cakes with the solemnity of a tax collector. My brother, he begins, says I've been using too many hot ingredients. You pause. Look at the cakes, sniff one. Your eyebrows rise. He adds, he says my liver will rebel and take the spleen with it. You nod slowly. And your brother? Herbalist, he mutters. Smug one. A mainstream historical fact. Persian medicine, rooted in humoral theory, divided all foods into qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry. And physicians often advised patients to balance their diet accordingly. Pomegranate, especially its seeds, were considered warming. Too much could supposedly trigger headaches, dry mouth, or a general feeling of emotional sharpness. You sit on the garden bench and motion for him to sit as well. He does, reluctantly. The cakes steam softly between you. You take one, break it open. The scent is glorious, sweet, tart, spiced with cinnamon and something else, possibly rebellion. You take a small bite, chew slowly, then sigh. It is undeniably delicious. You glance at him. How many did you eat yesterday? He hesitates. 5. You stare. He adds, in the evening. You nod gravely. There it is. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some physicians warned that eating hot foods like fried sweets after sunset could result in restless sleep, bad dreams, and what one rather dramatic manual called the snapping of internal harmony, like a bowstring too tightly drawn. You pull out your ledger, prescribe, no pastries after the sun touches the horizon, cold mint tea in the evening, a small bowl of soaked almonds, chewed slowly, and, if the craving is too strong, half a cake, warmed in a ceramic dish over cardamom water. He accepts this with all the dignity of a man halfway into his 6th cake. He leaves the platter for observation. You promise to observe them thoroughly. You take one more. Jot a note in the margin of your dream log. Possible link between overbaked ambition and toasted spleens. Then sit back, breathe, and savor the warm rebellion of pomegranate in your mouth. You are still licking the last of the pomegranate glaze from your thumb when your apprentice reappears, panting, clutching a scroll that looks suspiciously tea-stained, and saying between gulps of air, "The spice merchant dreamt of leopards again." You nod. Of course he did. You motion for the scroll. He hesitates. It's a bit smudged. You take it anyway. It is indeed smudged. The ink has bled, curling letters into shy spirals, as if the words themselves are embarrassed by what they contain. You squint. Leopards, sand, one fig tree, a bowl of turmeric that refused to mix. You nod. Sounds about right. A mainstream historical fact. Dream interpretation was a minor but respected part of 17th century Persian medical and spiritual practice. Physicians often consulted older texts linking specific dream symbols to humoral imbalances, dietary causes, or astrological timing. Leopards, it turns out, We're rarely literal. You gather your scarf, a jar of cardamom powder, and a book of dream symbols written in a hand more flourish than function. You head across town to the spice merchant's compound, where the scent of cumin meets you at the gate and doesn't let go. He greets you in silk, barefoot, nervous. His eyes dart like he's been followed by metaphor all morning. You sit. He recounts the dream again, this time with added detail. The leopards had polite expressions. You nod slowly. This is important. You ask what he ate. He blinks. 4 dried figs, a spoon of honey, a bite of goat. You raise an eyebrow. He adds, just the fatty part. You write this down, then prescribe 3 nights of gentle soup, lentil, soft rice, parsley. 1 evening, walk after sunset. No figs until the moon turns its cheek. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Persian dream manuals interpreted animal dreams through both emotional and digestive lenses. A polite leopard, possibly an overly warm stomach in need of quiet. A rude one, excess bile or envy, possibly both. A stubborn fig, likely a metaphor for ambition. You mix a small sachet of calming herbs, lavender, coriander, dried orange peel, and hand it over with instructions to steep just after the second prayer. He bows, then awkwardly asks if the turmeric was real. You say, only in flavor. He nods, as if that answers everything. You leave just as a breeze picks up, fluttering the edge of your robe and reminding you that sunset will come whether or not the leopards return. You walk home slowly. The city hums. Your scroll is lighter now. And so, perhaps, is the spice merchant. By the time you return home, the air has cooled, the light has turned amber, and your apprentice has finally stopped bouncing like a kettle too eager to boil. He's spread out your tools across the veranda in what he calls preparation, and what you'd call chaos with a helpful expression. On the mat lies a folded note. My elbow stings. I trust you. Signed with a drawing of a smiling sun. You sigh, roll up your sleeves, and open the cupboard of untested salves. It's time to experiment. A mainstream historical fact. Persian physicians often blended known remedies with speculative formulations, creating salves, tonics, and pastes based on classical sources, intuition, and what they'd seen work on that one guy who got stung by a bee while eating raw onions. You reach for the base. Almond oil, smooth and forgiving. Add a scoop of crushed myrtle leaves, a sprinkle of saffron threads, a drop of vinegar, and a pinch of powdered sugar, which was not technically medicinal but smelled friendly. Your apprentice watches wide-eyed. Is that for the elbow? You nod. He asks, should it be glowing? You don't answer. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some historical physicians tested new formulas on themselves, or on animals, or, when desperate, on cousins who owed them favors. One scroll from 1671 includes the phrase, "The swelling receded. The goat remains unimpressed." You stir the salve until it turns the color of optimism and smells like the inside of a very clean bakery. You pour it into a ceramic jar and label it. For elbows, ankles, and possibly misunderstood knees. The patient arrives just before sunset. A young woman with a bandaged elbow and the dignified frustration of someone whose injury is not dramatic enough for poetry, but too annoying to ignore. You unwrap the cloth gently. It's pink, slightly puffy, possibly offended. You apply the salve in slow circles. She hisses, then sighs, then stares. It smells like saffron cake. You nod. That's the sugar. She smiles. You wrap the elbow again, this time with linen dipped in rosewater. Then tell her to rest. Avoid stares. And definitely no angry sweeping. She thanks you. Leaves with a lighter step. Your apprentice picks up the leftover salve and asks, "Can I try it?" You say, "On what?" He thinks, "My thinking foot." You don't ask. You hand him the jar, and then sit down as the sky fades from amber to ink. Another experiment complete. Another elbow, temporarily at peace. Just as you're about to pour yourself a cup of evening tea, calm, minty, absolutely deserved, a poet arrives. He does not knock. He sweeps in with the energy of someone who's had 3 too many metaphors and not enough grounding spices. His robe is wrinkled, his ink-stained fingers flutter like distressed butterflies, and he's already halfway into a dramatic lament before you've managed to fully stand. "My thoughts are vibrating," he says. "I fear I've overmustarded my muse." You pause, blink, set your tea down, gently. A mainstream historical fact. Early modern Persian physicians sometimes treated scholars and poets as a distinct type of patient, prone to excess imagination, disrupted sleep, and what one manual called heat of the spirit. Food was often blamed, especially intense spices consumed without moderation. You guide him to a cushion. He sits like a falling curtain. You ask what he's eaten. He says, "A boiled egg, some horseradish, and 4 mustard seeds to awaken the morning." You raise one eyebrow. He continues, followed by coffee and verse. You make a note in your ledger, too much intensity, not enough bread. Here's your quirky tidbit. Mustard seeds were believed to increase warmth and circulation, useful in moderation, but dangerous in excess, especially for those prone to long sentences and emotional weather. You check his pulse, fast, fluttery, a bit self-conscious. You nod. Prescribe cool barley soup, thin yogurt. A slow walk around the courtyard while reciting only one-syllable words. You hand him a chilled rose compress and suggest he hold it to his forehead until his rhymes shorten. He accepts it like a crown. You prepare a tisane, lemon balm, a pinch of chamomile, 3 lavender petals, and the tiniest sprinkle of crushed pearl, if only for placebo. He drinks, pauses, sighs, then recites, "This tea like silence, unassuming yet immense." You don't smile, but your eyes do. He leaves lighter than he arrived. You pick up your tea again, now cold, still perfect. The sky above is now full of stars. You whisper to your cup, "No metaphors tonight, please." It complies. The stars blink above as you finally return to your bench beneath the apricot tree, sipping what's left of your tea while your apprentice sweeps lazily at the dust with a broom that's mostly symbolic. He hums a tune that might be based on your cough syrup recipe. You don't ask. Just as you lean back and begin composing your nightly notes, an elderly man approaches. He removes his cap slowly, revealing a scalp that's taken on the appearance of a parchment long scrubbed clean. He says, "My hair has gone on pilgrimage. I would like it to return." You nod solemnly. Let's consult the onion. A mainstream historical fact. Early Persian remedies for hair loss often included onion juice, sometimes mixed with honey, salt, or vinegar. The application was usually done in the early morning or evening and followed with a prayer or a quiet threat, depending on the patient's personality. You open your cabinet and pull out a red onion. It's sprouted slightly. You nod at it. It nods back spiritually. You slice it, grind it into paste, add honey, a pinch of cinnamon for circulation, and a single drop of rose oil, mostly for dignity. You stir it into a jar labeled Follicle Fortitude. Here's your quirky tidbit. One historical text recommends reciting a couplet from Ferdowsi's Shahnameh while applying hair tonics, believing that heroic words encouraged heroic follicles. One line famously ends, "And thus his eyebrows reappeared, fierce as mountains." You apply the salve to the man's scalp in slow, reverent circles. He smells like a pastry, but a determined one. You instruct him to wear a loose cotton cap overnight and avoid cursing at mirrors. He nods. You hand him a small scroll of affirmations. Say these each morning, especially the one about resilience. He bows, his eyes glistening slightly. You see him off with a sprig of thyme in his coat pocket, tradition, symbolism, and just enough scent to distract from the onion. You sit again. Write down the mixture. Add 2 stars beside it. Not because it worked, but because he smiled. Sometimes that's the real cure. The quiet barely has time to settle again when the next patient arrives, not alone, but with a pigeon in a basket and a rather apologetic tone. My cousin, she says, has developed a rash on his arms. We think it may be spiritual in origin. He's also been feeding the pigeons things they probably shouldn't eat. You nod. Of course. The cousin himself enters a moment later, scratching at his forearms like a man who made a questionable decision involving pickled apricots. The pigeon coos ominously from the basket. The evening deepens. You ask for a full recounting. He shrugs. It started after the festival. I wore a new robe. There was a lot of cinnamon. Also, someone threw dried shrimp. You blink. On purpose? Celebration. A mainstream historical fact. Persian physicians often attributed skin conditions to imbalances of heat and dryness in the body, commonly caused by spicy or overly salty foods, heavy fabric dyes, or enthusiastic festival behavior. Remedies included herbal poultices, cooling compresses, and dietary resets. You examine the rash, red, blotchy, slightly shaped like a very unimpressed pigeon. You nod again. Reach for your almond jar. You begin to grind. Blanched almonds, a bit of honey, a few drops of sesame oil, and a touch of cooling rosewater. You mash it into a smooth paste and spread it gently over the forearm. The scent alone might reduce stress by 5%. Here's your quirky tidbit. One physician recommended that rashes be treated with the humility of a neglected courtyard, which involved washing the area with vinegary water, drying it in shadow, and applying balm while reciting the phrase, "I am not an enemy to myself." You offer him a chilled cloth for his neck. He takes it, stops scratching. The pigeon, meanwhile, stares at your herb cabinet like it has its own opinions. You offer it a fennel seed. It declines. The patient leaves with instructions, no cinnamon, no scratchy robes, and a week of pigeon-free dreaming. You lean back, write down rash, possibly caused by joy, treated with almonds and light sarcasm. You sip what's left of your tea, and finally, for a moment, the night holds still. The moon has fully climbed into the sky now, draping the city in silver hush. But before you can close your ledger for the night, a knock rattles the frame of your courtyard door. Not loud, just steady. Familiar. You open it to find a woman you've known since your earliest apprenticeships. Her hair is gray now, tucked into a scarf that smells faintly of clove. She holds a bundle in one arm and a walking stick in the other. She smiles. "I bring you the windy baby," she says, and steps inside. The bundle moves, grunts, sneezes once like a very small elephant. You wave them both toward your low bench. A mainstream historical fact. Persian physicians recognized infant colic and wind in the belly as a common, uncomfortable but non-threatening condition. Treatments range from warmed oil rubs and herb-infused swaddles to recitations of gentle verses meant to soothe both baby and caretaker. You unwrap the child gently, chubby cheeks, furrowed brow, an expression that says, "I'm confused by my own stomach." You nod in deep sympathy. You take a small cloth and warm it over the brazier. In another bowl, you mash a mixture of fennel seed, dill, and honey. Just a trace. You roll the warmed cloth and place it over the baby's belly, your hand resting there gently like a promise. The baby blinks, then passes a very polite gust of gas. You and the old woman exchange a knowing look. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some records describe elderly patients sitting in during pediatric visits, not because they were sick, but because they found the process soothing. One grandmother reportedly called the practice a remedy for remembering how small worries used to be. You hand the woman a pouch of herbs for evening tea, one for her, one for the child. You say, "Wrap the child in this scarf when the moon rises." She takes it, then does something you don't expect. She kisses your hand, you blush. Immediately distract yourself with a pretend cough and a note about mustard leaf compresses. She gathers the baby, now sleeping soundly, and steps into the night. The door closes, and you feel something unexplainable, a sort of silence in your chest, like a bell that isn't ringing but might soon. You add a note to your scroll, "Windy baby, smiled in sleep, may grow into a scholar or a generous pigeon." You don't question it. The quiet has returned, but only just. You light the small lantern on your desk, adjust the wick until it burns with a steady, sensible glow, and open the day's final patient note. It's from a scribe at the library, folded with precision, sealed with ink, and faintly smudged by what you recognize as pomegranate jam. Again, he writes, "It is my wrist. It burns. Also my ink smells strange. Please advise. I fear divine punishment or possibly mold." You sigh, grab your jar of rose vinegar, and begin the slow walk to the scriptorium. A mainstream historical fact. Persian scribes and scholars were often treated for repetitive strain injuries, ink allergies, and what were politely termed copyists' itches. Physicians created remedies tailored for people whose ailments arose from stillness, precision, and paper that sometimes bit back. You arrive to find the scribe hunched dramatically over a manuscript, his wrist wrapped in 3 different layers of muslin and pessimism. You sit beside him, gently unwind the wrappings, red, tender, ink-stained to the knuckle. He winces. You dab the area with rose vinegar and lemon balm oil, then lay a cold compress made from mint leaves steeped in fennel. He inhales, sighs, immediately begins reciting a verse of gratitude far more elaborate than the injury requires. You nod through it. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some scribes kept their own mini ink gardens, tiny pots of violets, lavender, and marjoram on their desks to clear the head and remind the fingers of spring. One claimed his handwriting improved when the lavender bloomed. Another blamed thistles for every mistake. You gently rub his knuckles with almond paste, then tape a bit of silk over his wrist. "No copying until the new moon," you say. He frowns. "What about footnotes?" You raise an eyebrow. He sighs, accepts his fate. You hand him a pouch of dried petals for his ink pot. Not medicinal, you admit, but pleasant. He beams like you've offered him immortality. You walk home slowly, past windows lit with oil lamps, cats curled on rooftops, and the occasional shout of someone misplacing their sandals. Back in your courtyard, the rose vinegar still clings to your hands. You write one last note, copyist's wrist, cured with vinegar, mint, and enforced poetry fast. You stretch your own fingers. They ache faintly. You don't mind. The lamp flickers once, then steadies. You let it burn just a few moments longer. The sky above is a velvet curtain now, stitched with stars. Your lamp burns low, the flame shaped like a comma, pausing the sentence of the day. You consider extinguishing it, but first, one last errand. You reach for the dusty tin near your astrolabe. The lid creaks open, revealing dried mulberries, still slightly sweet, wrinkled like tiny thinkers. You pour a small handful into a linen pouch, tie it with twine, and add it to your traveling bag alongside a sprig of rue and your second favorite spoon. You walk to the roof, slowly, carefully, like someone preparing to meet a question, a mainstream historical fact. Persian physicians, especially those of scholarly inclination, consulted star charts not just for astrology, but for timing treatments, choosing ingredients, and understanding the rhythms of body and cosmos. While not universally accepted, many believed planetary movement influenced everything from liver function to social awkwardness. You unroll your old cracked star chart on the rooftop ledge, the parchment fluttering gently in the warm wind. The constellations are familiar, friends whose names change, but whose postures remain loyal. You trace the line of Saturn, check its angle to Mars, then glance up. Still there, still slow. You make a note in your margin scroll. Good time for mint, bad time for cloves. Definitely don't mention onions. You take out the mulberries. Chew slowly. The sweetness is faint but firm, like an idea well past its bloom but still useful. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some physicians kept a star herb notebook, a chart of celestial positions and corresponding herbs to avoid or favor. One note reads, "When Jupiter leans, avoid coriander. When the moon is shy, trust no celery." No one has confirmed the science. Everyone enjoyed the drama. You refill the tin with fresh herbs from your satchel. Dried lemon balm, a pinch of sage, one sliver of ginger root so thin it whispers. You place the tin back beside your astrolabe, now cool with night. You sit, cross-legged on the roof, your tea steaming in a clay cup, and let the breeze ask questions your body is too tired to answer. The stars blink slowly, like old patients. You nod at them, they say nothing, but stay, which is often all you need. The ledger is almost full now, not of accounts but of notes, patients, prescriptions, dreams, odd remarks about apricots, and that time someone mistook hair loss for divine punishment. You sit at your low desk, quill in hand, tea steaming beside you, and scratch the final lines of the day into the parchment. You write slowly, with the kind of care that comes not from worry, but from affection. You note the copyist's wrist, the spicy poet, the baby with the curious wind. You underline the onion salve and place an asterisk beside the pomegranate glaze, just in case. The night is quiet, not silent. There's still the rustle of trees, the creak of settling roofs, the faint splash of a neighbor emptying a wash basin. But it's the kind of quiet that rests lightly, like a shawl placed gently across your shoulders. A mainstream historical fact. Persian physicians often kept private ledgers, not just of medical data, but of their thoughts, musings, recipes, and passing philosophies. These were part notebook, part diary, part testament to the soft work of care. You finish your notes with one line. No one died, two laughed, one smiled while scratching less. You blow on the ink. Let it dry. Cap the bottle with a click that feels like punctuation. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some doctors use the final page of each ledger to write blessings for the next volume. One left this line: "May the next book hold less coughing and more clarity." Another simply wrote, "Let the ink behave." You close the ledger gently, tuck it beneath your pillow, and sip the last of your fennel tea. It's cooled now, slightly sweet. The kind of taste that says, you did enough. You sit by the window and let your eyes unfocus. The stars are still watching. So is the moon. You're too tired to interpret them, but they're too old to care. You exhale, fold your robe around you, and let the night begin its gentle work. Wind down. And now, as the last page dries and the tea cools on your tongue, let your breath slow. You've wrapped the baby, you've soothed the poet, you've tested the salve and ignored the pigeon. Let all of that fall away now. Let your thoughts settle like mulberries in a tin, soft and unhurried. You do not need to solve anyone tonight. The ink is capped, the stars are in their places, and the ledger is closed. Let your shoulders drop. Let your feet rest. Let your hands feel the absence of work. You've done enough. You've listened. You've smiled at leopards in dreams and offered sugar to rashes and hope to onions. Now, it's your turn to sleep, to breathe, to drift through your own quiet sky. The walls are still warm from the day's sun. Your teacup is empty. The moon does not demand anything from you, so close your eyes. Let the garden be tended by time. Let the patients rest in their own rhythms. Let the rosewater dry in the basin and the scrolls wait until dawn. You are, at last, allowed to simply be. No remedy, no record, just stillness. Now, dim the lights and sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.